Hello and welcome to another episode of Coding Secrets. This time I'm going to explain how they pulled off the special stage in Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Incidentally, while making this video I went down a total rabbit hole listening to remixes of the special stage music. Love this tune for some reason. So, the Sega Genesis has a background layer, a foreground layer and up to 80 sprites on screen at once. So for this special stage, here's a look at the background layer. It's used to give a sense of depth and parallax. And here's the foreground layer. It's obviously being used to draw the big sphere that we're running across, but also has the number of rings and spheres collected on it too. And here are all the sprites. They're being used to draw Sonic, Tails and obviously all the moving spheres and rings, but also to add the ring and sphere icons to the counters. At first I thought this was an odd thing to do, but then I realised that if they'd used the foreground layer it would have cut into the spherical floor, so they had to use sprites as they overlap. Now, looking at the spheres that make up the objects Sonic interacts with, we can see there are three types: red, blue and white with a red star. As the Sega Genesis doesn't have sprite scaling, different frames of animation needed to be stored for each size of the spheres. You can see the blue one here in video RAM with all of its frames. It looks a bit of a mess because of the way the Genesis stores sprite information, but you can see just the blue one takes up a reasonable amount of the very limited video RAM. You only get a total of 64K of video RAM, and this seems to take up around 4K of it already. And then you have the red and the white one with a red star to store as well. Or do you? They've actually used a nice trick so that they can get all three spheres from this one graphic. By drawing the same sprites in a different colour palette, it's obvious that you can get the red sphere as well. But because of the clever way they are using their colours, you can also get the white sphere with the red star by using a different palette. Here are the three palettes they use for the different spheres. You can see that these colours are used for the red and these for the blue, but you can see that for the white and red they use this palette. The only difference between the red and the white and red is these colours, which make the star red on red so you can't see it. I used a similar trick on the Toy Story driving sections as I was using mirrored graphics to speed up the render, but I obviously couldn't have things like sign writing mirrored, so I swapped the palette to hide and reveal the text and the turn graphic. It's pretty obvious if you look closely, but remarkably effective. So by changing between red and white they can make the star appear or disappear. Now, for the rings, a whole bunch of animation frames were used to both spin the rings and scale them. You can see them here in video RAM. Okay, so now we're left with the most obvious graphical feature of the special stage, the spherical floor. It looks a fantastic effect, but is remarkably simple to achieve. It's done using a very similar trick as I used for the full screen animation in Sonic 3D Blast. In simple terms, Sega have kind of stored 8 frames of animation in one set of graphics. You can see in video RAM that these are the blocks that make up the floor, and here is the palette for those blocks. You can see that there's a group of 8 colours that make up the floor. If you change the order of these colours, you can see that the graphic in video RAM changes. This is the next frame of the animation, and so on. By cycling through the palette you get the illusion of movement. This is what the graphics look like in a different palette. You can kind of see how the different frames are stored now. The animation of the floor is at 30 frames a second, and there is actually a total of 16 frames, so they have 2 different sets of floor graphics in video RAM and swap between them to get all 16 frames. Interestingly, when Sonic turns, it's always a 90-degree turn and always on the spot, so they just store 4 different frames and don't use palette swapping in the same way to achieve the animation. They do use screen mirroring to get those 7 frames out of just 4, but it wouldn't be a Coding Secrets video without some kind of mirroring, now would it? They do actually use one palette swap to make sure that the squares are the right colour to match the colour of the square you are turning on, as Sonic could be stood on either a red or an orange square when he turns. We can see that the rotation animation is stored here in video RAM and uses just 2 colours. This enables it to compress better, but they could have actually stored all 4 frames of animation for the turn in just one set of graphics if they had used exactly the same trick as I'd used for the full screen animation in Sonic 3D Blast, but it would have cost them an extra entire palette to pull it off. Here's a clip from the 3D Blast Coding Secrets to explain how it works. Now watch what happens to the image when I turn certain colours black and other colours white. We now have a black and white image of the 2 letters. So what's the big deal? We could have done that without using all 16 colours. Well, watch what happens if I use a different combination of which colours are black and which colours are white. The letters have moved. In fact, there are 4 different combinations of colours that can be set to black and white, which produce 4 different positions for the letters. In effect, 4 different animation frames stored within one 16-colour image. Now, the difference between my technique and the technique that they use to animate their floor is that my technique gives you 4 unique frames of animation in one set of graphic information. Their technique has given them 8 frames of animation, but they need to be ordered and no part of the image can overlap another part. So it's perfect for the scrolling floor, but not for the rotating floor. For the rotating floor, they would have had to have used my technique. If it was me, I think I'd have used my technique for the rotation to save memory, but at the expense of having to be slightly more limited in the palettes I'd be able to use for the level. Anyway, there you have it. That's my view of how all the tricks were used to pull off this level. Have I got it right? Is there a better way? Let me know in the comments, and please take a moment to like, subscribe, bell and share with your friends, and I'll see you next time on Coding Secrets. Goodbye.